We are recording the session, so please don't include any confidential patient health information during any discussion. On screen right now is some information on how to connect to audio and video. If you possibly can, that'd be great. And very good. Hi, Sean. Alrighty. So, and if you do wish to receive a CME, CEU, or an attendance certificate, you do need to announce your name during roll call. So we'll have a moment to do that here in just a moment. And if you don't have audio capabilities, you can always use the chat box. So hold that up here in a moment, and you can send any questions to us that way too, and I'll relay that to our presenter and our facilitator. Once again, there's video and audio information. If you haven't joined and you have that capability, then please do so. Our disclosure and accreditation statements are on screen now. We are required to post those. Good morning.
Sorry.
We're required to post those for CMEs.
Thanks for your patience.
Molina Healthcare and Blue Cross Blue Shield does offer some reimbursement for bringing your case consultations to us. That is something that we do offer through the AHI New Mexico series. So please take advantage of that. Just get in touch with me. My information's on here at the end of the slide set, as well as on our calendar, or on our website, excuse me. And we'll get you information about that. And without further ado, let's go ahead and do roll call real quick here. Anybody on audio out there? And if you're not on audio, just a reminder, we do need you to say that you're out there and where you're from. So just your name and your facility in the chat box would be great. And I think I'll go ahead and turn it over to Carol Conley, our facilitator for today.
Good morning, everybody, and welcome to Studio Envision. You are here at Adolescent Health Initiative, and before we get started, I would like to introduce some people in the room or have you introduce yourselves. I'm Carol Conley. I'm a social worker, education outreach manager here at Envision, and your facilitator.
Hey, I'm Jane Beckley. I'm a nurse practitioner working with Fronteras here at Envision, New Mexico.
My name is Maya Trujillo. I'm a quality improvement specialist here at Envision, New Mexico.
Hi, everyone. My name is Emma. Good morning. I'm an MSW intern here at Envision, New Mexico.
And this is Kevin Worling, systems analyst, and your support for today.
Thank you, Kevin. We appreciate your support. Okay, we are so pleased to have Anna Nelson come back and do this talk for us. Anna Nelson is an adjunct professor at New Mexico State University School of Social Work. She received her master's degree in social work in 2003 with honors from New Mexico Highlands University. Ms. Nelson has dedicated her career to serving youth, their families, and communities with experience in both direct practice and policy development. Her professional emphasis are youth and community engagement, violence prevention, gender-responsive, culturally relevant service systems development, and policy transformation. She has served on the board of directors for Pegasus Legal Services for Children and currently is an executive board member of Safe Team New Mexico and a national advisory board member of Love is Not Abuse. Further, Anna Nelson was integral into the development of this super peer curriculum, and we're really excited for you to share that with us today. I know that lots of providers need some help and some strategies in clinic in figuring out how to get the kids engaged in their own treatment and recovery.
Excellent. Well, welcome everyone. Thank you, and I'm really thrilled to be here again. This has just been such an honor for me, and I get excited every Wednesday morning when I get to join you all. So it's a real honor. I'm particularly excited about today's topic, which is super peer, and that stands for Substance Abuse Prevention, Early Intervention, and Referral, Peer Engagement and Education Resources. I even have to cheat to look at that to make sure I say it correctly. But that acronym really evolved in partnership with Envision and UNM Pediatrics, as well as UNM CASA. And so for a period of a year, I received funding to write this curriculum that I'll introduce you to today. And So this curriculum is really near and dear to my heart because as a person who's served youth for more than 26 years, I noticed in New Mexico that a lot of what we consider as practitioners evidence-based practices, there are some challenges for our young people here in New Mexico in what resonates for them culturally with regard to their socioeconomic experiences, to their gender and their sexual orientation identities, that sometimes young people would reach out or they'd have an opportunity to receive support services and didn't quite feel at home, pardon me, at home in those services. And so I spent, truly a year and a half developing this curriculum. And today what we'll do is we'll walk through the curriculum and speak specifically to how this can be tailored to school-based settings. It's intended to be a school linked curricula, as well as it can be implemented out in community. But because it's not a therapeutic model, instead it's about promoting healing through identity strengthening. It can be taken dialogue or module by module to be used in group settings, to be used, as dialogue in individual conversations as well with young people. So the curriculum was originally developed to serve young people ages 14 to 19, to engage young people ages 14 to 19. It's strongly rooted in evidenced practices, and it's adolescent development appropriate. So we'll go through all of that as we move forward. I apologize for being a few minutes late, and I didn't know if anyone online or in the room had an opportunity to look at the 9 dialogues and if there were any questions before we get started. Anybody? Also, I'm curious to hear, how you might find this relevant to the work that you're doing. I'd really love to tailor this dialogue today to what folks are doing out in community and, barriers you might see to implementing a new curriculum, or again, something that you're really interested in learning about how this may apply to your work. All right. Well, shout out if you have an aha moment during this morning. So, another piece I'd like to really offer my deep appreciation for. So, this is our acknowledgement page, and specifically, this was funded through the Conrad Hilton Foundation, as well as University of New Mexico Pediatrics Division of Adolescent Medicine, as well as CASA, as I mentioned. So this was designed in partnership with Daisy Rossetto, and I am the author of the curriculum. And then there were supporting program developers as well. Okay, so we are going through and we're going to introduce the 9 dialogues of Super Peer. And hopefully by the end of our conversation today, you'll understand these 9 dialogues and how they interweave together. Another piece is very shortly, our Head to Toe is coming up. We're really excited about that. And I'll have an opportunity to spend a lot of time in a longer workshop to be able to explain how you actually implement this. So this is really, I hope, to get folks excited and interested in participating in the much longer Head to Toe session as well. So you'll get the introduction, and then hopefully again you'll notice how this is different and tailored to young people specifically here in New Mexico. And there are a few dialogues that, again, during Head to Toe, I'll share with you the inserts of how these dialogues can be changed to mirror and really reflect the realities of young people in a particular community. So this was specifically made to empower young people to be peer educators on issues surrounding substance use and other adolescent health risks. With these couple of dialogues that we've revised and we'll be able to offer you at Head to Toe can address things like early unplanned pregnancy. It can address healthy weight. It can address teen dating violence prevention. So it really has a multispectral application. So this is super tiny, but again, you should have received a full packet, and it looks like this. The full packet gives you the summary of the table of contents for the entire curricula. It also gives you a much larger dialogue summary so that you can really read it. I know, if you're like me, you need your glasses to read stuff like this. So we're going to go through and I'll explain how this curriculum works. So, and then we'll talk about what super peer is and what super peer isn't. Again, I mentioned that this is a peer education, peer leadership curricula. It's not a therapeutic model, but there's a lot of healing that comes through this. And I do see a question popped up.
So this is from Sean, and it says, I'd like to better assess for substance use and abuse and motivate change during clinical visits and understand their experiences better. So I think she's
Excellent.
thinking about the context for all of this.
Wonderful. Well, what's nice about this is we spend a lot of time. So motivational interviewing is a component of this curriculum, which is exciting. But what we did was we actually adapted motivational interviewing to address motivational communication. So we're looking at this really as empowering young people to be able to internalize these skills for better communication, which will help them in their healing process. And then also these motivational skills that we embedded in this curriculum also will help to engage other young people in dialogue on healthier choices. And it also, it's also showing signs of improvement in self-help seeking behavior. So that's exciting. So we know that that's an indicator of, thank you so much. That's an indicator of being able to really improve sobriety options for young people. So I'll embed that, and I'm sorry, I didn't know who said that, but I'll embed that in our dialogue this morning as well. So if we look at this here, you'll notice it begins with a 3-hour training for those adult allies in community who are interested in implementing the full curriculum. So those adult allies really have a distinct role in community in engaging young people and also in being there when young people experience stressful experiences with other peers, so if they're out there, they're educating other young people and they notice that there's some high risk behavior that they're really concerned about. These adult allies are there to support them and mentor them through that process of getting that other young person linked to services. Okay, so this 3-hour training also is offered to be able to fully facilitate this curriculum. So this is actually a free curriculum. So I also probably should have said that in the disclosure. Nobody's financially benefiting from this curriculum. This is intended to be community-based and community-driven. So it will be available to you all at Head to Toe. The full curriculum, once Head to Toe happens, will be available through Envision. So, it's just really important to know that this is something you can use, adapt, let us know how it works. So that's good. I'm also available to offer this 3-hour facilitation training to support you in knowing how to do this work fully through the full 9 dialogues. So the first dialogue, and we're naming them dialogue rather than session, obviously, because it's not intended to be therapeutic in nature. So why do you think we make that distinction? Why is that important to make that distinction about what this is and what this isn't? Anybody have any ideas about that?
Well, I would think if you call it a dialogue and think of it less as a therapeutic intervention, it makes it accessible to different kinds of adults to engage young people in the work.
Exactly. So this is meant to be a great opportunity for people who are prepared, with independent licensure, social workers, clinicians, etc. But it's also intended to be that adult mentor in the community who has phenomenal youth engagement skills, but who may have not gone to school to attain those skills.
Right.
So it reaches a broad array of adults, as well as one unique aspect of super peer is this is really about addressing social justice as much as it is addressing identity strengthening. And the idea behind that is we're empowering young people to, and this just gets me a little teary right now, just given the movement building that's happening nationally with our youth, that is led by our young people and is making tremendous impact nationally. this couldn't have been more randomly timed, but perfectly timed for what our young people here in New Mexico as well are trying to achieve. So the idea about calling it dialogues is that we're in communication with youth in a more equitable way. So there's not that power differential that sometimes young people feel with adults or clinicians. It equalizes that power differential a little bit, and that's intentional. So the first session it's called We Got This Together, Peer Education Relationship Building. And so that is really designed for young people to identify their assets and their strengths and things that they could leverage toward a collective process in a team to address an adolescent health issue in their community. Again, substance use is huge, and that's what it was originally designed for, but it can be, myriad adolescent health risks that they address. The second dialogue is about understanding roles and boundaries. And we do this with the adults as well. Again, given that, adults may have their professional role, but they may have this facilitator, mentorship, or ally role as well. And how do you navigate that? How do you know how to set those clear boundaries with young people? Because that actually, believe it or not, I'm preaching to the choir, but that creates safety for young people. It creates trust. It creates a sense of consistency and, again, safety. So how do adults do that? And then we're also empowering young people to know what we call, how do you draw your line in the sand, right? How do you know this is my personal space, this is my intellectual, emotional, spiritual space, and I'm here to link you to services, but I may not be able to support you fully through what you're going through. So that second session is about empowering young people on their roles, and that's actually really fun. So I have had the opportunity to implement this curriculum and have gotten phenomenal feedback from the young people who participated. It was just, again, super inspirational, and they are ready to, mobilize and change their school community, and it's really exciting. So, okay, and then Peer Educator Dialogue 3 is about early identification of youth substance use. So for the modules that you will, or I should say dialogues that you can insert, we've done the same model where one dialogue is specific to how do you identify this health risk among your peers, and then what do you do once you've identified it? Okay, how do you use motivational communication to engage them in conversation? How do you get them linked to school-based or school-linked resources? So that's Dialogue 3. Dialogue 4 is all about lighting the sparks of change, communication strategies for peer educators to increase young people's motivation to change. So we also talk about something called intent versus impact with young people. So through my 26 years of the work and then also 10 years of teaching social work, one of the pieces that I love to bring into the curricula is looking at anti-oppression strategies. So in this Dialogue 4, we talk about intent versus impact, which is a powerful communication skill that young people and we as adults can use when you're in a conversation and you notice an aspect of oppression has happened, whether it's sexism, homophobia, racism, whatever type of oppression. This communication skill is a powerful way to address that and to keep yourself well protected while feeling empowered to say, well, something just happened and it's had an impact on me. Why we felt this is really important to embed in, you might think, well, what's the point of that, right, in relationship to substance use or other adolescent health risks? And emerging literature teaches us that oppression is a form of trauma. And so what we know through trauma research, and I've had an opportunity to speak a bit on this, what we know in trauma research is that lays the foundation for risk for substance use, early unplanned pregnancy, teen dating violence, etc. So we thought, let's do something different with our young people here in New Mexico and be transparent and call oppression what it is and help to empower these young people to develop protective and resilient skills around oppression that's happening in their environment. So that's something, really exciting specific to this curriculum. Okay, and then Peer Educator Dialogue 5 is resilience from our roots, understanding what makes us strong and what we need to withstand the winds of change. And so that's a neat conversation to have with young people too. What do you know about where you're from and who, what community you represent, and, the strengths and core values of your family that create that resilience within you. Okay, and so young people really get the time and space to explore that and to say, okay, so I learned this from my nana or my tia or whoever, and this is something I bring into my world now. And so sometimes you find young people who are like, I don't want to talk about that. That's not my experience. I can't identify strengths within my environment right now. And so what we do is we honor that itself as a point of resilience and being able to name that. And we also talk with young people about, okay, so you have a lot of lived experience. You know a lot about life already. What would you like to do differently than what you were taught? Or what would you like to go back to that you know about that is relevant to your identity, your culture, et cetera, that you'd like to bring into your world now moving forward? And that can be, again, just a really powerful moving conversation. So that is the Dialogue 5. Dialogue 6 is, this is really exciting too. Dialogue 6 is one of my favorite ones to create. It's about understanding your core values and how that relates to you as a leader. So if you're in a clinical setting, it can be how it relates to a young person's capacity to lead, but it's also a capacity to heal. So looking at your core values can really help you, again, feel that sense of, I am strong, I come from a place, I have identity. And so this began, again, more than a year, probably now 2 years ago. I was in a conversation with adult learners, not with youth. We were talking about how we define values. And nationally, there's a lot of literature out there about values-based decision-making and values-based leadership, et cetera. But when you pull down the list of values, it can be very biased toward a dominant culture or a particular ethnicity. Yes. And so it can be very dominant, Anglo-centric. And, again, if that's your cultural identity, sometimes folks don't know that that's a cultural identity. It's a cultural identity. Hold on to it, right? And at the same time, there's a vast array of other forms of identity that we need to honor and respect and bring into our conversations. So I went on a mad search I went on a mini lit review for other values based on culture and other forms of identity. And again, not to bore you too much, it was just heavily researched, and I want you all to feel empowered to know that there's literature behind this. And when you get the full curriculum, you'll see that there's the lit review that you can use. You can use for grants. You can use to advocate for with administration to say there's data behind this, there's literature. But specific to this, when young people are supported in naming their identities and claiming their own sense of who they are, it's incredibly protective against, again, substance use and other issues. But specific to this, I went on, this search for what does it look like for Indigenous First Nations communities to name values? What does it look like for African American communities to name values? How about Latino communities? What does that look like? So I created I should say, as comprehensive as I could, list of values that is culturally driven. And so it looks at things like collectivism, spirituality. It really gets deep on valuing relationship. And so, young people are asked in this dialogue to look at this list of values, select their top 10, and then they're asked to narrow it down further and further until they have their core set of 5 values. And then we have this really great conversation about how do those values relate to being a strong leader in your community, a strong example of, choice making, et cetera, in community. And then we also talk about how do these core values aid you in making the decisions that will keep you healthy and strong. So that was probably one of my funnest things to look at. And so I'm going to pause there. We've got a few more, but I want to make sure to check in with folks if they have questions or anything that you're curious about. Anybody in the room curious about anything? No? Okay. So we'll finish out by talking about, so this is, the dialogue 7 through and 8 are really important, and what I found is these two are the hardest to implement in community because they need that strong adult ally to be present and supportive of the work. I've also added in here, based on the pilot that we did, more skills and tools for young people to act as advocates. So how do you create a movement? How do you act as a advocate or an activist? What's the difference? We talk about collaboration, all the full spectrum of collaboration, all the way to being a rebel. And I know for adults that might be like, what? Wait a minute, wait a minute. But we talk about safe ways to navigate really tough social issues in ways that can be constructive and healthy, and not put those young people at risk in any way. So if you remember a couple weeks back, we talked about the forms of cultural capital, one of which was navigational capital. Mm-hmm. This idea of being a rebel is how do you navigate difficult situations in a way that your voice is heard and you don't have a negative consequence, like landing up in juvenile justice, for example. So I'm sure I mentioned this at some point, but some of the best clinical work I ever was honored to do was with juvenile justice engaged youth. And absolutely 100% of all those young people were leaders. They just needed those pathways to safe leadership and self-advocacy. So, okay. So the 7 and 8 are, so what we know about where to go, school and community asset mapping. So this actually plays two roles. To back up really quickly, this actually could be a full semester curriculum, but we were asked to design this in 45-minute chunks in no longer than 9 sessions. But this literally could be a full semester curriculum for a peer group. Yes.
So I just want to clarify, because that was one of my questions I was just thinking of, is that you spend 45 minutes, in dialogue with these kiddos and stuff, and then do you give them time to practice and talk more, and so then you come back together next week, or do you try to stage it at regular intervals?
So, I think probably the first 6 months of this project was to try and figure out how to make this work in schools.
Okay.
Again, it can be school based, or it really can be out in community. And when you're in community, you have so much more flexibility, right? Like you can spend 90. I recommend if in my dream world, I would make this 3 months long, 90-minute chunks every week if I could in my dream world. This is intended to we did it a couple of different ways. One was to do weekly, play it out weekly 45-minute sessions, and then the chunk of taking a few of these dialogues and combining them. They naturally fit. Usually 2 dialogues naturally fit together, so you can have a longer period of time with young people. So we condensed it down to 4 weeks of about 90 minutes apiece. Okay. But the idea, so your question is really important. So that's kind of the dosage, right? Like the
Yes.
But then you think about the practice piece. Yes. How do you integrate this new knowledge? So when we were able to do it in community, we had this ability to share the information in a way that wasn't overwhelming to youth, and then youth got an opportunity to practice. Then they made a plan between dialogues to link up together and keep working on this together. Okay, so it's also intended to be a cohort process where you have, ideally, I think we had 9 or 10 youth. Ideally, like 4 to 5 young people is a perfect amount of young people to do this work together.
Okay.
Yeah. So that's a really great question. I'm glad you asked that. And as we get closer to head to toe, one of the things, in fact, I'm going to make a note to myself to make sure to map the application out a little bit for folks in different ways that you all can do it out in community. And again, a section of this can be a standalone session conversation.
Mhm.
And I, was trying to think about that too. How could we use this to be supportive to clinicians out in community and just take out a section? Let's learn more about how you identify and who you are. So let's take that dialogue out. So, okay. So community asset mapping. So 7 and 8 were originally 4 sessions in length. And so then we pared that down to the bare essentials about how might you go about developing a community impact project. So you start off by studying what is out in community now. And you look beyond the usual suspects, right? You want to know who those clinicians, those behavioral health resources or medical resources are out in community, who's out there for emergency support. And then you want to step up your spectrum of who you're assessing as an asset and think about those natural support people out in the community. So, I'm thinking about like youth pastors, coaches, and then even more non-traditional, thinking about those, those elders in community who are there, who have good supportive connections with young people and who you can go to and ask questions about life, right? Just the people who are committed to supporting young people to thrive. And that would be considered part of that community asset mapping. And then you want to gather data to make your case. So part of what we do with this is we teach young people about the Youth Risk and Resiliency Survey. When this was a much broader 4-session piece, we talked about something called youth participatory action research, which is my passion and my love, for young people to learn how to name a research question, create data collection tools, go out into community. And we know that young people are more honest with other young people, so they gather accurate data and then they learn how to analyze it and use it for the purpose of an impact project. So that's a whole nother thing that if you are interested, I have, a ton of stuff and a kind of an idea how you can implement that out in community. It's just a sort of an aside to this curriculum. So then session 8, once we kind of get the youth-centered resource asset map completed, making an impact is steps for planning and implementing a community impact project. So because this is so short, it was, it had to be short. We just introduced the way that young people would go about defining a project and creating, building the resources they need to implement that project, and then steps to putting it into place. So again, in a dream world, if this was longer, we would stay with those young people until they implement that project. So this was also designed to be a community senior impact, a senior project. Mm-hmm. It was also designed to help young people get service learning credits. So, we're thinking about how to embed this again in a way that's sustainable for you. And then the final one is really important, and that was super fun as well, which was to celebrate successes and to invite family and important people in those young people's lives once they've completed this, to celebrate all the great work that they did. And the idea there is that young people, we help them to create a presentation of learning. So we have a little framework for young people to say, this is what I learned during these 8 conversations. This is what, this is the neat stuff I learned, and this is what I plan to do with it. And so that was cool. We had young people present entirely in Spanish about their favorite aspects of the curriculum. Again, a dream would be that this could be fully translated at least into Spanish and other languages. So these are sort of plan Bs moving forward. Yeah. So thoughts or questions there?
Are there places that have done, what schools are doing this?
Well, we're rolling it out now.
Okay.
Where we had the full implementation, the full 100% implementation was at Tech Leadership. We also hope to implement at RFK this spring as well. We haven't been able to implement in a non-charter school setting yet, but we'll keep working on that. And so, you know, it's just exciting. So Tech Leadership is really our go-to about the how it went for the full curriculum.
It sounds like the Health Leadership High School
Yeah.
here would be a good place to do this as well, because it seems like they're doing a lot of this as far as the curriculum they
Yeah.
look at.
Absolutely, and they're actually, their curriculum is so well organized that it's hard to squeeze this in. Otherwise, we would have gone to health. You know, it is a perfect fit.
Yeah.
Do you have a preference age-wise? Like, you know, sometimes in adolescence, if you hit them earlier, it's more effective. Sometimes when they're older, because they need different cognitive skills. And where do you see this fitting best? Middle school, high school, or can the adults flex it so that
it's intended to be developmentally appropriate for 14 to 19.
Okay.
But I'm going to tell you, I think some of these deeper process. So in our world of prevention, middle school is where it's at, right? And ideally, obviously, elementary school, but middle school is where it's at. But when we're talking about a much deeper sort of integration of this knowledge set, you know, sophomore plus is a really good age range, you know, so 15 to 19 seems to really resonate for them. Any other questions online? Okay, so you know, like always, here we are 15 minutes before we have to be done. So I really, again, want to encourage you to attend Head to Toe if it's possible. If it's not, I am always available to continue this conversation out in community. If there seems to be, after Head to Toe, if there seems to be strong interest, I'd really like to schedule a few of the full adult orientations to help folks get you know, sort of acclimated. And the way that we're going to do Head to Toe, but also how the orientation, the full 3-hour orientation is set up is, what is it? See one, do one, teach one. Is that it? So the model is to see the skills in practice, you know, try one out and then teach an aspect of the curriculum. So that's what we plan to do to help really empower people to feel confidently going back to their homes and using this. So, okay. So quickly, just a reminder what super peer is and what it isn't. So I'm just going to scoot through what we've already talked about. So trusted adults who support young people will have the opportunity to build skills and best practices for culturally humble, positive youth engagement. So that actually is a different approach than what most folks are doing about PYD. It specifically is about how do we approach not just with our adultism in mind, but also from a place of cultural humility. That's a public health strategy, and it's really powerful in engagement in an authentic way. And again, it's not a therapeutic intervention. It's a youth leadership program focused on developing peer educators to prevent and identify youth substance use early or other adolescent health risks. So here are the guiding principles. And this, to me, this was a labor of love as well, because as I would bring these ideas back to the curriculum committee, it would, you know, I kind of had to fight for some of this stuff. So we know in school settings, confidentiality can be a handful, right? Because FERPA guides that. So you know, we're clear that confidentiality is absolutely critical for young people to feel open. And so in order to feel emotionally safe to engage in super peer, young people really need to know that their fellow peer educators, the facilitator, and adult ally will maintain their confidentiality and privacy. And so we train up what's the difference between privacy and confidentiality, and then we use youth-friendly language to talk about confidentiality in the first session, in the first dialogue. And honoring and respecting diversity of identity and thought is non-negotiable. Now, here's something funny. You would think we wouldn't have to say that, right? But obviously, I should say, it is obvious to me right now that it's really important to be explicit that honoring a wide array of identity is absolutely critical, and there's no compromise on that. And I say that up front because if that's not the community in which folks exist right now, we will strive to make that safety exist in that community, but it may not be the time to implement this because we want young people to feel strong and to have voice in a safe way. So for example, I had a young person who identified as transgender in our pilot. And he was incredibly supported by his peers and by that community. And if we were maybe in a different setting statewide, that may not have been a safe disclosure for that young person to make. So it just is really critical right now that we make that clear. And then culturally relevant, social justice informed, positive youth development is critical to authentic youth engagement. And that's a huge mouthful of terms that we break down and deconstruct and kind of what we call unpack in the 3-hour training. So what does it mean to do culturally relevant work? What is social justice? What's that about? PYD, we of course talk about. So that's a key piece. And believing that young people listen best to other young people. So that helps us as adults to kind of check ourselves and realize, in fact, where we may have expertise, we may not be expert in navigating youth experience. And then finally, young people are natural innovators. This is the funnest part. This is why I feel like, when I actually get to do work with young people, I just feel like I get younger and younger and younger. It just really sparks just passion in my heart. And it's often because young people have such capacity to heal and grow. And it also is so powerful to hear their, innovative questions and concepts about how to address social issues. So it's just, really neat. And then finally, all young people are eligible to participate in super pairs. So that's another question that comes up a lot too. Who do we recruit? Who do we engage? Is it only those young people with substance use issues? Can young people with substance issues even participate? So there's a lot of ambiguity about that. So all young people are eligible to participate. Young people make an agreement in the beginning to come sober to the dialogues. And they also make an agreement that that in order for the safety and well-being of the group, that if there are challenges with sobriety or choices around substance use, that they approach the adult ally or another peer to get support. And it may not be the best time for them to participate in the full 9 dialogues, but they can come back anytime. So it's an open door policy so that young people know that that's a safe space for them. And so it says here too, this is kind of another explicit statement. During participation, there's an expectation that peer educators will refrain from using substances, and youth should be supported and not penalized for disclosure of use. So that's kind of another piece there. So just pressing pause, any questions or thoughts about that?
Sean says it sounds fantastic. Thank you.
Oh, thanks. Thanks for saying that. Thanks for being interested. I really appreciate that feedback, and I can't wait to share more. Another piece.
We implemented at mid-schools.
Yes.
Which is some of the challenges around time constraints or whatever, but it's possible, right?
It is absolutely possible to implement with middle school aged youth. So, middle school is such a beautiful time, and there's such a wide array of development that's happening. So I would leave it up to the adult ally or the facilitator to know their young people really well and to take the stuff out of this curriculum that's going to, make them feel disengaged in any way. We really try to keep this sort of developmentally and linguistically appropriate for that full spectrum of young people. So I look to you guys to know your young people best and decide what of these 8, dialogues will really resonate and be helpful.
I have a question.
So in a school setting, how do we make students feel comfortable coming to somebody who actually works in the school to talk about these things? Because I think it can be nerve-wracking for a student to go to a teacher or a faculty member and say, I'm having substance abuse issues, or, you know, even divulge that at all if they feel like they're going to get in trouble for it.
Yeah. So, and we're edging even more to a more punitive response for youth with issues right now with need. So the easy answer is that young people know where the safe zones are, right?
Right.
That to help young people, like in the beginning of a semester, to know who are those folks they can go to, where they can have kind of a confidential conversation and not feel scared of what's going to happen to them. Having said that, you know, part of this always relates to HIPAA and FERPA. And FERPA trumps HIPAA. So that's a family education, blah, 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 policy that drives what can be kept confidential in schools.
Right.
So, so what's really hard is we, as adults, need to be really mindful about how and where we choose to implement this so that young people's confidentiality can truly be protected. And we also have to be really knowledgeable about what each of our communities are doing around a youth who comes and says, I'm actively using, I have a weapon, I feel suicidal, what's going to happen to these young people, right? So so part of our work, you know, part of the ethic behind this is, and I'll talk about this at Head to Toe, part of the ethic behind this is to really know how much influence do we really have in being able to be protective of these youth.
Okay.
And so that doesn't mean so our knee-jerk reaction is to swing to the other side of the pendulum and be like, we can't talk about that because bad stuff might happen, and ooh, you know. No, I'm not saying that we swing to the other side and say, okay, I know you're going to say something that is going to be risky and I don't want to hear it. Instead, we're going to say, you know, I feel that you're about to share something really important, and I'm here to be supportive of you in sharing this really important thing, and I'm going to be your ally. And at the same time, because I really respect you, I want you to understand what might happen with this information if you share it with me. And just lay it out like that so the young people have a choice.
Okay, that makes sense. Thank you.
You're welcome. So that's a short answer. The other answer is this: we have to. This is about building community and changing the paradigms and culture within a school setting. So our state's been amazing in the work of implementing natural helpers across the state, or other peer education type programs. And so the unintended positive consequence that comes from that is school climates improve and relationships between youth and adults in school settings improve. And so that's what we hope will happen when this is implemented, that same culture shift within schools. And that's a longer process. So kind of a two-pronged answer to that.
Okay, great, thank you.
Evan, is there another question?
Yes, so Sean had a follow-up to the previous question.
Okay.
So I will let our nurse practitioner at Washington and Van Buren Middle Schools
Yay.
know about it, probably best for 8th graders.
Yes, absolutely. I would advocate for 8th graders. Yeah, and I like I said, have mad love in working with middle school aged young people, and so again, if I won't be able to prepare this for Head to Toe, but if given the opportunity to train out in community, I could prepare mid school specific strategies on how to implement this. Okay, so another point that I wanted to share with you in this, it's hard to see, but this is on page 8 of your handout, also very pretty colors. I enjoy the pretty colors, right? So this is what we call the web of influence, and this is actually based on a CDC framework for change. So the web of influence is developed through a literature review, and it's specifically looking at what are we trying to improve in order to reduce adolescent health risk at the end, okay? So it begins with the protective and resilience factors. And again, all of this is from the literature. So we're looking at what within individuals and peers are we trying to build out. So we're looking at building positive self-concept, positive peer role models, positive meaningful activities, and cultural identity as a connection. And then we go, so I've arranged this from individual and peer to family and trusted adult is the sort of next domain or circle. And so Emma, this is really ecological model also. So, so we built this out from a common sociology or social work framework, which is the socio-ecological model as well. And so family and trusted adults, we're looking at building strong bonds and connection to family. That's why that dialogue 9, that celebration of successes, is so important, because we encourage young people to bring all the important people in their lives, together to hear their, oh my gosh, what, 2 minutes. Okay, so anyways, that's the web of influence and I just wanted to get to what's special about Super Peer, and then we'll just end with that, okay? Again, hope to get to continue these conversations. I really love these opportunities. So the 3 things that we wanted to understand better or do better in this curriculum than what is done in other curricula. So we did a lit review of other similar curricula to figure out who's doing this or what other curricula address this. And so aspects of this are addressed in other curricula that already exist, but not all 3 together. So Super Peer is unique in 3 different ways. We really look at positive youth development as the foundational framework, but I wanted to improve that, especially given our sociocultural context right now, because I wanted this to integrate social justice concepts. I wanted us to understand, I wanted young people to know about what's happening and to have a level of youth-friendly analysis, and just so that their experiences are validated and they feel appreciated in that, I'm not crazy, this is really happening. And so the second aspect that's different about Super Peer is it develops peer educators who will both promote resilience and protective factors while also acting as early identifiers and responders to risk. Okay, so we teach young people to spot it early and to link other young people with supportive resources. And then finally, it is a culturally relevant, effectively integrating cultural and other forms of identity as protective factors and identity-grounded activities throughout the entire curriculum. So there are some culturally specific modules. So there's a writing activity from Sandra Cisneros about your name, but there's a ton of other activities that can be embedded for the communities in which you work. So we've included that in the additional resources. So with that, I am done. So I'd like to answer any other questions that are coming up.
And while we're waiting on questions, what we're going to do is send out the survey for today through email. It wasn't quite ready this morning, so we're going to send that out to you, and that'll be coming from me, Kay Whirling. And also, if you haven't chimed in and said hello to get roll call taken care of, then please do so. And we'd love to have any questions.
This may be a little bit of a loose association.
Okay.
You made reference to, the student movement around safety in school.
Mm-hmm.
And there was an interesting piece on NPR this morning about the role of bullying in schools that probably contributes to the risk. I mean, would something like this have a potential?
Absolutely. Well, okay, so it's not a loose association at all. So the other unique thing about Super Peer is we really looked at building resilience and protective factors. We focused on the positive but not in a naive way. We do really look at adolescent health risk, which includes bullying, and we understand that that those unsafe environments, when young people don't feel safe in going to school, it leads to a whole host of challenges in other ways. Bullying is also evidence to increase risk for suicide for the person being bullied, and it's also increasing risk for perpetrating teen dating violence for the individual who is perpetrating bullying. And so having said all that, if that was the core issue that young people selected on which to focus for super peer, this could be used as a bullying prevention program. So that aside, some secondary outcomes for peer leadership and peer education is that it improves relationships among peers. So it naturally decreases risks like bullying.
This was great.
Oh,
Yeah.
thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You all, this has like been a labor of love. This was like, I cried a lot while I was writing this. It was really hard to write. Yeah.
So Iveth Ortiz, she's chimed in and it says it seems to be very empowering curriculum, especially for adolescents who many times may not have a voice.
Oh, thank you.
I would love to see it touch our rural communities.
Absolutely. So, so unfortunately, the Conrad Hilton Foundation funding has now it's concluded, and which is a real bummer because I would have loved to have done way more around implementation. However, you know, if you were able to join us during the teen dating violence conversation, you know, I talked about the fact that we literally changed the rate of teen dating violence with $0. Again, it's a hard way to move change, but it is absolutely possible, and it's possible here in New Mexico more than anywhere. So the challenge that I'm facing right now is I just need to find a train to caboose on for this in terms of being able to show up in community and get this out there. I'd also love to have opportunities to engage our students. You know, our students in the schools of social work in the state to get the word out, you know, across the state in a little bit more strategic way, right? The initial part was just about trying to get this written, and now we got to figure out how to get it out there and get it implemented to a degree of quality to give you all technical assistance. And then also, you know, I mean, where are we? We're at a vision, right? So we want to talk about continuous improvement. And so this, you know, is under construction. It's kind of like a publicly sourced thing that we all want to contribute to and figure out how to improve.
Thank you for the plug.
You're so welcome. You're so welcome. Yeah.
Can you do some of this dialogue training in a telehealth setting?
Of course. Yeah, absolutely. In fact, I'm getting really, I'm starting to really dig telehealth, actually. Yeah, we're doing a lot more teaching online.
Maybe we should have a super peer. That's a great idea. We invite school-based health center people to start there because, you know, there is some protections around confidentiality and privacy, but maybe we could roll it out like a 10-week session thing and do some training and get people in the room to practice while you're facilitating and teaching.
Yep. It would be, yeah, it would really, I would really love that. And I also think that would just be a low cost, really impactful way to get this information out. I mean, I'm really committed to making sure that folks have this as a usable resource. I do not want this to be a binder that sits on your shelf and gets dusty.
Right.
You know, I want it to be out there in use.
Well, thank you, everyone. Thank you for staying on later. I hope you have a fabulous rest of your week, and we'll see you here next week.
Okay, take care, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Be safe. Bye-bye.